Okay, so as citizens under the democratic rule in the United States, it is kind of our responsibility to take part in stuff that our country supports, such as what Nick was saying earlier about whether you're electing the president or other members of Congress and stuff like that. One of these laws that our country supports is the death penalty. So as citizens, like I was saying, it is kind of our responsibility, at least to some extent, that we do take a little bit of responsibility for the murders that the death penalty commits in a way, whether it's judged correctly, it's under the death penalty's guidelines. So if we are going to take a little bit of responsibility to it, I think we should analyze whether the death penalty is an effective way in providing safety in the United States to the citizens. So my major claim is that the death penalty is in fact an ineffective way in providing safety to the citizens of the United States. I will first talk about the murder rate in the United States and how it climbs. I'll talk about the death penalty as an ineffective deterrent to future crimes, and I'll also talk about how the funding could be used in different ways, such as providing more police officers on the streets to stop crimes at first hand. So for the murder rate in the United States, you would think that if the death penalty is effective in stopping crime, that the murder rate would be decreasing annually year after year. In fact, by Death Penalty Information Organization Center, the murder rate in the United States in 2014 was 14,164 murders committed. It actually increased in 2015 by a little over 1,000, going up to 15,696 murders committed. And since it is in 2015, it is still pretty recent. Next up, there are some states that don't support the death penalty, and then there are some that do. So you would also think again that the states that do not support the death penalty might have more crime than states that do have it. This again is wrong. The average murder rate in states with the death penalty is 5.1, while the average murder rate of states without the death penalty is 4.1, which is a pretty significant difference, and this again was taken in 2015. Next up, you might be thinking, well, if that's not enough information, the United States as a country has more murders committed yearly than other countries such as Europe and Canada, which these countries again do not support the death penalty. For my second claim, I'll be talking about how the death penalty is not an effective deterrent to future crimes. And a deterrent, again, is just kind of something that will prevent the future crimes from happening. As stated from the LA police chief, criminals do not expect to be caught when they commit these crimes. They also don't really weigh the differences whether they're going to be sentenced to a life in prison or whether they're going to be sentenced to the death sentence. Again, this frequently happens because under these intense moments of like these murder moments, I guess, they are committed in intense moments of passion, anger, or often even under the use of substances such as drugs or alcohol. And then thirdly, I will talk about how the funding could be used differently. The funding right now, in my opinion, should be used towards putting more police on the streets to prevent these crimes from happening. There's 15% of the Attorney General of his budget. 15% of the Attorney General's budget annually is used towards these death penalty cases. This in total is about $11 million annually, as well as according to the Death Penalty Information Center. As well as this, $90,000 more dollars is used up in housing criminals on death row than if we were to just put them in a regular general prison facility. This again totals up to $57.5 million spent annually, more than if we were to just house them in a regular prison. And then also there was a police survey done in 1995 where they selected random police chiefs throughout the whole United States, and the general opinion from these police chiefs is that they should rather spend the money on controlling drugs, they should increase gun control, and they should also patrol more safe neighborhoods to increase the safety of citizens and the atmosphere in general. So in conclusion, the murder rate in the United States is climbing by an increasingly rate. The death penalty is also not an effective deterrent to future crimes because it doesn't really come into the criminals' minds before they commit the crimes. And also the funding towards the death penalty should be used in ways such as hiring more police officers to prioritize these better ways, such as controlling drugs, guns, and patrolling patrolling neighborhoods to make them safer as well. And this all supports my major claim of the death penalty being ineffective in providing safety to the citizens of the United States. Thank you.
All right, Cameron, I like the reference to the earlier speech as your introduction, talking about our involvement in the body politic and our need to, identify responsibilities, that sort of thing. I thought that was okay. The transition to the death penalty was a little bit awkward, but it worked. You did have a very clear statement of what your proposition is. It seems to be phrased appropriately. There's a good preview of what the supporting structure is, so organizationally things are pretty solid at the beginning of the speech. Now, when we got to the first point, though, in the body of the speech, I think you have a little bit of a problem with the way the claim is stated, because it's not really stated as a claim. You just kind of identify a topic about the murder rate. There's an inference here that the murder rate is somehow indicative of whether or not the death penalty is successful at reducing crime or not. That's the way that the claim needs to be stated. As it is, we could figure it out eventually. I know what it is you're trying to say, but you shouldn't make it that hard for people. You should got to draw a picture. Remember, it's listeners are not the same as readers, and if you have listeners who are casual listeners, that it's a discussion on it. If we've got multiple speakers here, maybe not everybody's listening as carefully. You got to sometimes bullet point those things so they can clearly see what it is your point is. But I got the point, and I thought that was appropriate for the argument that you're making. I just think that the label needed to be a little bit clearer there. Your proof on some of the information is okay. You've got some statistical information on the first point on the increase in the number of murders. I do think that you need to suggest that maybe there should be some comparison to the death penalty in that situation, because the fact that you have continuous increases in the number of murders that take place, I'm not exactly sure that that's indicative of the failure of the death penalty if the death penalty is being used. I think one of the arguments that would be made by the other side, of course, is that we've had increases in the murder rate. That's because fewer people are being executed anymore. And one of the examples, for instance, is Illinois, where in Chicago the murder rate's gone up dramatically. And of course, they got rid of the death penalty a few years ago. So I would imagine that they'll be pointing that out. But you want to be saying, look, we've had the death penalty, and the murder rate just keeps climbing, regardless of what punishments we put into place. And then I think you want to apply your argument that says, look, criminals don't think about this kind of thing. And that would make, I think, that point fit a little bit more effectively. The data that you have for that second point that says that it doesn't work, I thought it was, you had the statistical comparison with the states. I think you need to clarify what that is a little bit more. I think I understand what you mean by the rate of murder, 5.1 versus 4.1. I assume that's the number of people who are murdered per 100,000 in the population, but yours is not. You don't quite explain that, so that needs to be clarified a little bit. And then you identify the LA police chief, but we don't get a date on this, and so I don't know if it's the current chief or somebody from 25 years ago who's saying these things, or even 30 years ago, because we've got, or 20, I guess, years ago, because later on you make a reference to a 1995 survey, and I'm going, okay, so how recent is this opinion? That kind of thing. And it sounds like it's a paraphrase, and a very long paraphrase of that concept. And I think it would fit better with the argument that you made earlier, like I said, that, the criminals aren't really thinking about what the punishment is. They act out of, the moment of passion, or they are under the influence of drugs, or they just don't worry about whatever the consequences are in those particular situations. I think that's the argument that would fit a little bit better. The cost issue, I think, needs a little bit more development. You've got some information about the Attorney General's budget. I don't know if that's the state of California or some other state, or if it's the Attorney General of the United States. $11 million, that's a good chunk of change to you and me. I don't know how big a difference it would make in law enforcement, and the notion that that $11 million is the thing that's going to turn the all those police chiefs are going to be happy and be able to control crime because they got $11 million that the Attorney General's not getting anymore. That's a huge inferential leap, and I think you need a little bit better development on that. You did a nice job summarizing the argument, and you had a pretty strong exit line reminding us of the point that you were trying to make. Thank you.